Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All right, we're going to kick off the Gurnee Village Board regular meeting of January 4th, 2021 to order. Roll call, please, Andy.
Hood.
Here.
Torstenson. Ross.
Here.
Garner.
Here.
O'Brien.
Present.
Bomas.
Present.
That's 5 present and 1 absent.
All right, and trustee Thorstensen did let us know she's unable to make it tonight. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, first item of business is approval of the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Motion by trustee Balmas, second by trustee O'Brien. Roll call, please.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Bomas.
Aye.
Hood.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
5 aye.
Motion carries. Patrick, please read the consent agenda into the record.
Item number 1, approval of the minutes from the December 21st, 2020 meeting. Item number 2, approval of ordinance 2021-01, accepting the public improvements for the Wentworth of Gurnee development. Item number 3, approval of communication operator Brent Kuffels' request to participate in the village's tuition assistance program in pursuit of an associate's degree in criminal justice from Gateway Technical College. Item number 4, approval of payroll for period ending December 18, 2020 in the amount of $821,048. Item number 5, approval of bills for period ending January 4, 2021 in the amount of $505,830.31.
Thank you, Patrick. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second.
Motion by trustee Garner, second by trustee Ross. Roll call, please.
Hood.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Bomas.
Aye.
5 aye.
Motion carries. Move on to petitions and communications. The first is an approval for a proclamation for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, January 18th, 2020. Do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
Motion by trustee Garner, second by trustee Oh, I'm sorry. It is 2021. I read it into the record wrong. January 18th, 2021, and I had a second by trustee O'Brien.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, it's Dr. Martin Luther King Day, January 18th, 2021. Gosh, it's going to take a few times. We have no other petitions and communications, so we're going to move on to reports. First is a presentation by our Finance Director, Brian Gosnell, on our CAFR for the year ending April 30th, 2020.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Typically, from a timing standpoint, typically we would do this end of October, early November. A couple things set us back this year, obviously, staffing issues everywhere due to the COVID crisis, but also we were waiting on some guidance on the CARES Act, how to account for the CARES Act, and that didn't come until after the 30th. So we were kind of stuck in limbo until after October. So Lauterbach and Amon, as you know, is the village's independent auditor. Auditors typically come on site. This year everything was remote. They test various transactions, internal controls, all in accordance with governmental auditing standards. They then compile financial statements and then express an opinion on the accuracy of those statements. The final document that we get, kind of the deliverables, is the CAFR, or Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. That comes along with a management letter, what's called a SAS 114 letter, which is Statement on Auditing Standards, which is the independent auditor's communication directly with the board. That letter is included in the packet. And then this year, because we had over $750,000 in federal grant money, which was another delay to the process here, we were subject to a single audit, which means The auditors then go through and make sure that all of the transactions related to the grant complied with federal guidelines. So it was a little bit of a, and we'll have that next year too. It was a little bit of a different year in that respect. So the CAFR is the main document and the main thing I wanted to go over a little bit tonight. CAFR consists of a bunch of sections. An introduction, which is management, puts that together. Just goes over the organization, economic factors, planning, financial policies, things like that. The independent auditors report, which lays out the responsibilities of management and the auditor, just so everybody's on the same page. And then in that, they also express their opinion. We did have an unqualified audit, which is a clean audit again this year. Then there's management discussion and analysis, which goes a little more in depth. That is written by management, really a high-level overview. Then we get into the financial statements, government-wide financial statements, which are more of a broad across the government look, as the name implies, government-wide. And then individual fund financial statements, which is really what we focus on when we're looking at financial statements. Notes to the financial statements, a bunch of required supplementary information, and then what's called other supplementary information. Those are all prepared by the auditors, and then statistical section is prepared by management, which is really a 10-year comparison of some financial and operating data. It's kind of neat to look through that section and see what happened 10 years ago and where we're at now. So just wanted to start with kind of some highlights of the financial statements, starting with the government-wide section. The government-wide is on page 35 and 36 of the report. And it breaks it down into two categories: governmental activities and business-type activities. So business-type activities consists of the water fund and the golf course fund. Governmental activities is really everything else, with the exception of pension funds, the JETSB fund, or the Northeast Lake County Consolidated Dispatch Fund, and SSA number 2, because for those, we just act as fiduciaries. So just looking at governmental activities, there's a couple highlights, financial highlights here. Total assets of $114 million. That was down 4.2 from last year. Cash and investments, a couple highlights of what goes into that number. Cash and investments totals just over $27 million. That was down $2.5 million. Here we see the impact of, and we'll see this throughout a couple of the slides I'm gonna go over, but we'll see the impact of the March and April shutdown on some revenues. Those, even though we receive, like for sales tax, we'll receive that in this fiscal year. For audit purposes, that's timed with the month that it's earned in. So even though we receive March and April in June and July, it is, for audit purposes, in this audit. Even though it's in our fiscal year 21, for reporting purposes, it's in the fiscal year 20 audit. So we do see the impact on that. We also paid off the Series 2011 bonds, so we had some cash outlay for that. We utilized MFT last year. We weren't going to do that this year, but we changed that up a little bit. So all those things kind of play into that drop in the cash balance there. Receivables, here's where you also see the impact of those receipts. $6.2 million, that's down $1.8 million. We had $1.2 million just in, and I'll get it on the next slide, but $1.2 million in just kind of the big four alone. So that's the impact of March and April. Liabilities, total $54.8 million, that's down $5.3 million. A little bit timing of capital expenditures. The big one here is our long-term debt. We paid it off. So that was down $4.5 million to zero. On the business type activity side, total assets, $71.3 million. Here, this is almost entirely the water fund. I think the golf course fund's about $4.8 million of that total. So primarily all the water fund. Here we see transactions, cash down again, IEPA loan, finished the Knowles Tower, some of those capital projects, money going out. We see a little bit of COVID impact on Water and sewer sales at the end of the year, not too crazy there in the total scheme of things. Largely, both of these funds are made up of capital assets, $64 million. Obviously, that's up with the tower. And then on the liability side, we had debt going up with the IEPA loan. So that's, again, government-wide. It's hard to read a whole lot into that from a revenue and expense standpoint because it's such a broad look at across a bunch of different funds. More into the general fund here, page 39. Flip to that one. Now we start to look at individual fund level information. Cash and investments, $22.9 million, down 1.6. Again, here we had the payoff of the bonds and the COVID impact. Taxes receivable here, you'll see the big impact from those last 2 months. Again, 1.2 just for the big four. That was total taxes receivable. We're down 1.8 million on the year over year. Income statement side, revenues totaled 42.3, so relatively flat. It's kind of difficult to go year over year here because fiscal year 19 was kind of unique. Great Wolf was opening back in the beginning of the year. We had Safer Grant come in fiscal year 20 that we didn't have in 19. So if we had an a better apples to apples comparison, it would have looked a lot worse. But year over year revenues looked relatively flat. The expenditure side was up, totaled $43.3 million. That was up 1.6 from the prior year. If you recall, we had the Safer Grant. We added 6 firefighters, partially offset by the grant. So on the expenditure side, that went up. We also made some adjustments to dispatch and a couple other more minor personnel adjustments, but all added to the increase in expenditures there in the general fund. As a result, we get to the end of the year, revenues, expenditures, general fund balance is $25.7 million. That's almost 61% of this year's operating expenditures, down only $992,000. So if you look at the impact from the big four and what we were down on the year in fund balance, but for the impact of March and April, we would have actually been able to pay off the bonds and contribute a little bit to fund balance, which was the plan until obviously COVID hit. So you see that plan kind of bear out in the financial statements here. Again, COVID threw a wrench into almost everything. Just looking at a few other funds, the capital fund, cash and investments at 2.7, that is up 1.9. Revenues here, $6 million, was down slightly because of the home rule sales tax impact. We did have a $1.4 million revenue here for the sale of the tower. However, if you look year over year, that was offset because in fiscal year 19, we transferred in $1.5 million of surplus. We did not do that in 20 because we were paying off bonds. Expenditures in line with the capital plan, so the fund balance here ended the year at just over $3 million. We had plans in fiscal year 20 to spend about half that, but when we saw or fiscal year 21 to spend about half that, the ideal target balance here we say is right around $1 million, $1.5 million, so we want to stay kind of in that range. So really, when we look at the long-term capital plan, anything over that, we look to kind of spend in the next year. Obviously, COVID changed that as well, so we look to spread that out a little bit more and keep a little bit more in that fund so we could either cushion the impact of the home rule sales tax or give us, flexibility in the future. So either way, the money in that fund is dedicated to capital as it stands right now. So anything that we don't spend stays in there and we can spend it in a future year, so unless there's some other action taken. Fund balances in some other funds. Motor fuel tax ended the year at $512,000 again. We utilized it in fiscal year 20, so we would expect to see that balance come down. Impact fee fund ended at $918,000. If you recall, during budget, we use impact fee funds to transfer to the capital improvement fund, primarily to offset stormwater management. PD restricted asset forfeiture fund here, we had $162,000 in there at the end of the year. This is money that has to be specifically spent on law enforcement activities. I think it's governed by the state police and some state statute. Look, we'll probably start utilizing this a little more, particularly in this upcoming budget. Again, when we talk about, and we'll talk more when we get to the forecast, but pressure release valves on capital and general fund, this is one of them. This is restricted money that we can use, that we would normally budget either in the general fund or the capital fund. Perfect time to use it when those other funds are under pressure, so. Talk more about that, obviously, when we get to the fiscal year 22 budget and how we're going to utilize that. And then the debt service fund, we finished at $17,000. This typically had about $1.4 million in it, but we use that to pay off the bonds. So we are no longer under any need to reserve a fund balance in here for next year's debt service because we don't have any general obligation debt. Water and sewer fund, here is primarily the Knowles Road Tower timing and the IPA loan. Again, slight impact from the COVID on the last couple months of usage. Cash investments down 1.3. Knowles Road, if you recall, we paid about $800,000 to that out of village reserves we didn't want to borrow the full amount of the IEPA loan. Or actually, our target was a little more than that, but we scaled that back this year. So we'll end up paying just that. We also had capital plan, the multi-year capital plan has us drawing that down over time until this year, actually, when we saw the Jawa rate drop. So we were drawing that down to supplement the capital plan. Revenues, almost 9.2 million, expenditures, almost 9.5, so you see that drawdown of that. Almost 59 million in net position. Almost 55 million of that is capital assets, so not anything that is spendable, but investment in capital assets. Unrestricted net position is kind of the fund balance category that most aligns to the governmental side. So it's fund balance. You can call it in water and sewer funds. It's about 4.2 million, or 51.5% of expenditures. When we're talking about water and sewer fund, I think 50% of expenditures is probably the ceiling. Obviously, we have to be sensitive balancing this off rate adjustments in the future. So, if we had a 75% fund balance, that people may ask why we need rate adjustments. So we want to keep that at a level there that's adequate, but not over the top. Then we get into notes to the financial statements. If we look at, skip the bunch here. Note number 2, page 61. This talks about some budgetary information. It has the 2 items that also show up in the management letter. We did have 2 funds that went over budget on the year. One was the golf course fund. If you recall, they did some landscaping right at the end of the year, and also we had, and this came before the board April 6th, that I thought would constitute a budget amendment, but I need to do a formal separate ordinance amending the budget, not included in an action to authorize emergency funds to help the golf course get through that operating season right at the end of the year. So the board approved that in a separate action, but I did not put a budget amendment ordinance along with it, so we got cited for it. And then special service area number 2 was simply a budgeting error. I picked up the wrong year on the debt service, so got cited for that as well.
You're forgiven.
Thank you. So those 2 things will show up here and in the management letter. So there's no getting out of that one. Note 3 on page 63. This goes into deposit and investment detail, capital asset detail, and long-term debt. It's nice to see the long-term debt number. Obviously, that is gone now. We only have 2 outstanding debt. That is the IPA loan, at least as of fiscal year 20, the IPA loan and a capital lease for golf course equipment. So if we turn to page, let's see here, 95. apologize. Anyway, there's page 81 is pension and OPEB information in note 4 as well. This goes through our actuarial accrued liability for all three pension funds, actually, IMRF, police and fire, and then other post-employment benefits, which is also an actuarially determined amount. Moving to required supplementary information, this starts on page 103, continues with pension and OPEB detail, goes into employer contributions, and there's two that I wanted to point out here on page 104 and 105, which is the police and fire pension fund. If you look middle of the page, you'll see a chart, contributions, excess, deficiency of our required contributions. If you recall, 3 or 4 years ago, as part of the strategic plan, actually, we updated a pension funding policy. Part of that policy said, if we can, and budget allows, we will budget for any deficits from our assumed rate of return or assumptions that are otherwise in the pension funding policy. So we won't amortize losses, we'll try to pay them all up front. Is basically what that said. So we were able to do that. On the police pension side, you see there $39,766. We overpaid in that year. And then if you flip the page, firefighter pension fund, $98,922. We overpaid in 2020. So again, trying not to extend those losses if we can make that up right away, put the money in, helps us down the road. Pages 112, I got these page numbers right. 112 and 113, police fire pension funds give you historical return information. As you can see, and again, these are things we look at over the long term. So, but you can see 16, 17, last 5 years of rate information, so 16 through 20 there. And then on the fire side, again, just as a reminder, our rate of return is 7%. So matching up against that, again, that whole universe is going to change in another year when consolidation happens. So I'm not sure how these notes will show up after that. But at some point, we are going to have a consolidated investment manager for all the downstate police and fire pension funds. And then on page 114, there's more OPEB liability information. Again, it's all actuary, so we have, it's an implied liability for us. We keep folks on the plan as long as they contribute 100% of the charge. So they have to pay 100% of the premium, but there's an implied liability there by keeping people, retired, older folks on the plan. That's what that number represents. And then other information starting on page 117. Here we get into budget to actual schedules, combining statements, grant schedule that we talked about earlier, and then that stats section. That is really that 10-year look back, which gives us, which is, like I said, kind of a nice thing to look back and see the trends over the years. I did have one question on a note. It was related to the police pension. Had roughly $300,000 excess in a bank account that was not covered by FDIC insurance. So both police and fire, obviously their investment managers want to keep as many assets as they can under their control. But they do have bills due at the end of the month, and they pay the pensioners, obviously, first of the month. So they try to manage that cash flow. So often they will have, for a short period, 1 to 3, maybe a week at the most, they will exceed that FDIC insurance just to keep that in there for checks clearing or direct deposits going out. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Obviously, there's a lot of information in this document. Can be daunting, but happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the trustees? Trustee Hood?
This current number is just, what's our cushion? And it's beyond this, obviously, but just where are we at these days?
As far as,
Just for our,
like, general fund?
right, general fund, right?
So after the numbers I looked at, after we made the pension payments, we're about 2 million. So we're 2 million down from that number. So would put us around that 23. You know, we expect that to get worse here a little bit at the end. So I think probably we'll end up around that 22 million mark again, which is still, you know, it's a good fund balance number, but we have a lot of exposure, so.
Thanks.
Trustee Garner?
Just a question on our debt service fund. You said, you know, we had depleted it paying off some bonds. How do we replenish that fund? How's
So-
that fund replenished?
Yeah, so it's really, bond covenants require us to have the next year's debt service in reserve in that fund. So that's essentially how that fund was established. We paid off our last general obligation debt, so we don't have that requirement anymore. So that fund essentially went from 1.4 million in reserves to, well, the 17,000, or whatever it was right at the end of the year there, to zero. So, and after 4/30/20, we don't have any kind of restriction or requirement to have next year's debt service because we don't have any. So, but the purpose of that fund is solely to manage debt service payments and handle any bond covenants for general obligation debt.
Yeah,
Can it-
so I was just going to say, so coming into this next year's budget, you'll see a couple funds that'll basically be zeroed out. Debt service fund will be zeroed out, SSA 2 will be zeroed
zeroed
out.
out.
We're not expecting to have any expenditures probably in the golf course fund.
Right.
But SSA 2 and the debt service fund, both of those will be inactive. Debt service fund wouldn't fire back up again until we issued some general obligation
Right.
debt at some point in the future, which there's no plans to do that anytime soon, so.
We paid off our mortgages early,
So do
which
we,
is a good thing to do
Oh,
when
it's
you've got
great.
less revenue coming in.
so with the 17,000 that's left, does it just sit there, or do you?
I'll end up transferring it back to the
You end up
general fund.
transferring?
Yeah.
And the other question I had was on the police department asset forfeiture fund. There's 162,000. Are they under any obligation to spend that money annually, or can it just sit there and build up until they come up with a good idea?
It can build up. In fact, we haven't spent any, I don't think in at least the 6 years I've been here, I don't think we've budgeted anything. But historically, we haven't, you know, we just don't get a lot in there every year.
Yeah.
So that may change, but, you know, typically you let it build up, and then if you have like a one-off capital expenditure, that's what you'd use it for.
Sure.
Or if you have, you know, like the situation we're in now, where we have some police expenditures that qualify for that fund, we can give a little relief to the general less restricted money in the capital fund or the general fund, so.
So they're not restricted to spend it by a certain period of time?
I'm not aware of a timeline. I'd have to double check on that, but
No, it's just,
I've never heard of one.
off the top of my head,
Yeah.
here's this money that's
I've never
coming
heard of
in,
one.
and it's just sitting in an account.
it's more purpose, you know, what you can spend it on.
Okay.
So if some of the asset forfeiture has been in the form of vehicles, but that gets accounted for elsewhere? You don't show it in this because it's a real thing?
Yeah, vehicles do not unless we would monetize it. So if we would sell it or whatever, then we would have it in here. We do keep it on our books in that government-wide fund, so we have to count it as an asset. So it is in, you know, our capital assets. But we wouldn't show it in that fund unless we sold it.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, we've gotten in cars that then we use
Right.
for things, so,
Yeah. But we do carry that value as a capital asset.
okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. Trustee Bomas?
No.
Oh, I was going to say, we are probably looking better than 99% of other communities because we've been so conservative and prudent, saving money every year, putting it in reserves, paying off things early. And we did that because we knew how much risk we have if something goes wrong with the Big Four. And now we're experiencing that, but we're weathering it. It'll be an interesting budget process this year. Tough choices ahead, because it's really hard to predict where this is going or how fast it'll recover.
Still a lot of unknown.
Yeah, there are way too many unknowns, and again,
This has nothing to do with this, but have we heard anything out of the governor as far as changing the January 10th or whatever?
You know, I talked to the Illinois Municipal League a couple weeks back, and they didn't have concrete data, but we're of the feeling that once we get to January 9th, the current mitigation measures wouldn't be extended, was kind of what they were picking up from the governor's office. But we haven't heard anything. I haven't seen any calls scheduled. I can tell you, as of today, Region 9, three out of our 4 metrics are good to move to the next stage, but we have 1 metric that fell back into the red that doesn't meet that threshold to move out of the current mitigation measures. So those change on a daily basis, and you've got to have all 4 in the green, and as of today, we don't, so.
all right, well, I know Pat and Brian are watching every penny, every day, so thank you. That's all we can do for now. This is a whole different ballgame than anything we've ever done before. Trustee Ross?
I just wanted to compliment you on the good comments that the auditor said about the cooperation and, you know, good job.
Sure, thank you.
It'd be nice if every resident read our CAFR. It really does give you a very good understanding of the village's financial management, where we're at, what's gone on, you know, besides just the dollars and cents, just the overall picture, but it's probably asking too much. Maybe we could do a YouTube show.
There you go.
Let them watch it on YouTube. All right. So it was a short agenda tonight. It obviously didn't beat Trustee Balmus's record, but we have no other business. Hats off on the first 3 snow events. Excellent job. Roads were beautiful. Jake did a really good job, and Heather too. It was quiet over the holidays, so we're ready to hit it for 2021. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Trustee Balmus,
Thank you, Brian.
second by Trustee O'Brien. Yes, ma'am. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. I'm never going to beat your record.